Officer Robert Hayes cruised through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge, his eyes scanning the well-kept lawns and expensive homes. 12 years on the force had given him what he called a sixth sense about who belonged where. The morning sun glinted off his badge as he sipped coffee from a travel mug, the radio crackling quietly with routine updates. The neighborhood was peaceful, just how the residents liked it. Robert knew most of them by name: the doctor at the corner house, the retired teacher with the rose garden, the bank executive with the German shepherd. This was his beat, and he took pride in keeping it safe. As he turned onto Maple Street, something caught his attention. A tall black man in a gray hoodie and running shorts was jogging along the sidewalk. Robert didn't recognize him, and something in his gut tightened. He slowed the patrol car, following at a distance for half a block, watching as the man maintained a steady pace, occasionally checking what appeared to be a fitness tracker on his wrist. Robert's mind filled with questions. He'd responded to 3 break-ins in nearby neighborhoods last month. The descriptions had been vague, but he remembered the dispatcher mentioning a tall male suspect. Without giving it much more thought, he flashed his lights and pulled alongside the jogger. The man slowed to a stop, breathing heavily from his run, pulling out earbuds as he turned toward the patrol car. Robert noticed his athletic build, the military-precise haircut, and the way he stood, straight-backed, composed, despite the sweat on his brow. "Good morning, sir," Robert called through his open window. "Mind if I have a word with you?" The jogger looked surprised but nodded. "Is everything okay, officer?" Robert stepped out of his vehicle, one hand casually resting near his belt. "I haven't seen you around here before. Do you live in the area?" "Yes, sir, just moved in last week, Cedar Lane, number 47, the man replied, pointing toward a street 2 blocks over. "I'm Michael Turner." Robert didn't acknowledge the introduction. "I'll need to see some ID, Mr. Turner." Michael's expression shifted slightly, a tightening around the eyes that Robert had seen countless times before. "May I ask why?" "I'm just out for my morning run. We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," Robert said, the lie coming easily. "Just doing my job, making sure everyone belongs where they are." Michael took a slow breath. "I don't carry ID when I run, officer, but I'd be happy to show you my house key, or we could walk over to my place. It's just around the corner." "No. ID, huh?" Robert's tone hardened. "That's convenient. What exactly brings you to Oak Ridge? This is a pretty expensive neighborhood." By now, a couple of residents had noticed the interaction. Mrs. Patterson was watching from her front porch, watering, can in hand, and a man walking his golden retriever had slowed his pace, observing from across the street. "I retired from the Navy last month," Michael explained, his voice remaining level despite the growing tension. 20 years of service. I bought the Wilson place when they moved to Florida." Robert wasn't convinced. "The Wilson place? On Cedar? That sold for over $1 million. "Yes, sir, that's the one." Michael's jaw tightened slightly, but his composure never wavered. "I saved during my deployments, made some good investments." "What kind of Navy work did you do?" Robert pressed, skepticism clear in his voice. "I was with the SEALs. Special Operations." Robert almost snorted. This seemed too convenient, too perfect a story. "Is that right? And I suppose you've got medals." "2? Several, actually," Michael replied without emotion. "Including the Silver Star and 2 Purple Hearts." The dog walker had moved closer now, and Robert noticed he was wearing a Marine Corps veteran cap. The man was listening intently, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. "Hey, Turner," the man called out suddenly. "Michael Turner?" Michael turned, surprise registering on his face. "Lieutenant Parker? Anthony Parker?" The dog walker broke into a grin. "I thought that was you. Didn't know you were living in Oak Ridge now." He approached, extending his hand to Michael, completely ignoring Robert. "Just moved in," Michael replied, shaking the man's hand. "Good to see you, sir." Anthony Parker turned to Robert, his friendly expression vanishing. "Officer, do you have any idea who you're talking to? Commander Turner here led the extraction team that saved my unit in Kandahar 23 Marines made it home because of him and his team. Robert felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. He glanced at Michael, seeing him differently now, noticing the calm confidence, the disciplined stance, the watchful eyes that seemed to take in everything around them. "Is there a problem here?" another voice called. A woman in a business suit had stepped out of her car across the street. Robert recognized her as the district attorney who had recently moved to Oak Ridge. "No problem," Michael said quickly. "Just a misunderstanding." Robert knew he was in a difficult position now. 3 witnesses, one a prominent legal figure, had seen him stop a man who had done nothing wrong. A decorated veteran, no less. "Just routine community policing," Robert said, stiffly. "Getting to know our new residents." He nodded curtly to Michael. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Mr. Turner. Enjoy your run." As Robert turned back toward his patrol car, he heard the district attorney introduce herself to Michael. Their conversation faded as he closed his car door, but through the window he caught Michael's response. "No, ma'am, I don't want to file a complaint. I'm sure the officer was just doing his job." The generosity of that statement made Robert feel even worse. He sat motionless behind the wheel, watching as Michael exchanged a few more words with the neighbors before continuing his run. The others, dispersing with backward glances at the patrol car. As Robert pulled away from the curb, the radio crackled to life, a routine call about a fender bender across town. But his mind wasn't on the call. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning his instincts, wondering what exactly had made him stop Michael Turner, and what it said about the kind of officer, the kind of person he had become. 3 days after the uncomfortable encounter with Michael Turner, Officer Robert Hayes found himself on edge. The incident had stirred up something he didn't want to face. Twice, the sergeant had called him into the office to discuss community relations, but Robert had brushed it off as politics. Deep down, though, he wondered if Turner had filed a complaint after all. It was a surprisingly warm Saturday afternoon when the call came through. "All units in the vicinity of Lakeside Park. We have a vehicle in the water with possible occupants trapped inside. Fire and rescue en route." Robert was just 2 blocks away. "Unit 17 responding," he said into his radio, flipping on his lights and siren. His heart raced as he sped toward the park. Water rescues were always bad. The clock ticked faster, and options were few. He arrived at the scene to find a crowd, gathered at the boat launch. A silver SUV was half submerged about 30 feet from shore, its front end already underwater, the back slowly sinking. Robert could see movement inside. Someone was alive in there. "What happened?" he shouted, pushing through the onlookers. A teenage boy, soaking wet and shivering despite the warm day, spoke up. "My little brother and mom, we were unloading the boat and the brake. It just rolled." The boy's voice cracked. "I tried to get to them, but the doors are locked and it's sinking so fast." Robert kicked off his shoes and was about to dive in when a familiar voice called out behind him, "Wait, I've got gear." Robert turned to see Michael Turner rushing toward the water's edge, carrying what looked like a small duffel bag. He wore cargo shorts and a t-shirt with Navy printed across the chest, clearly interrupted from whatever weekend activities he'd been enjoying. "I've got rescue equipment and training," Michael said quickly, dropping the bag and pulling out a compact rescue hammer designed to break car windows. "How many in the vehicle?" "2, Robert replied, momentarily setting aside their previous encounter. "Woman and a child," Michael nodded, already stripping off his shirt. "I'll go in. You coordinate with rescue when they arrive and keep everyone back. If I tap twice on the surface, I need backup immediately." Before Robert could respond, Michael had waded into the water. With powerful strokes, he swam toward the sinking vehicle, the rescue hammer secured to his wrist. The crowd watched in tense silence as he reached the SUV and disappeared beneath the surface. Robert found himself holding his breath along with everyone else. Seconds stretched into a minute. The back end of the vehicle was now almost completely submerged. Finally, Michael surfaced, gasping for air, and then immediately dove back down. Another agonizing minute passed. The wail of approaching sirens filled the air as fire trucks and an ambulance raced toward the scene. Just as the emergency vehicle screeched to a halt, the surface of the lake erupted. Michael emerged, one arm wrapped around a small boy who coughed and sputtered but was clearly alive. Using his free arm to swim, Michael brought the child toward shore. Robert waded in, meeting them halfway and taking the boy into his arms. "The mother?" he asked urgently. Still working on her seatbelt, Michael gasped, already turning back. "She's conscious but trapped. The water's almost to the ceiling inside." Robert handed the boy to paramedics who had rushed forward, then turned to the fire chief who had just arrived. "We've got a woman still trapped. The rescuer needs tools." But Michael was already diving back down, refusing to wait. Robert watched helplessly as bubbles broke the surface where the SUV had now completely disappeared beneath the murky water. 1 minute passed, then 2. The fire rescue team was suiting up, but Robert knew they wouldn't be ready in time. Just as he was about to dive in himself, Michael burst through the surface, pulling a woman with him. Her face was pale, her lips blue, but she was moving weakly, helping as much as she could as Michael swam them both to shore. Paramedics rushed forward with a backboard. As they took the woman from Michael's grasp, he collapsed onto his hands and knees in the shallow water, coughing and gasping for breath. Robert splashed toward him, helping him to his feet. "That was incredible," he said, genuinely awed. Michael nodded weakly, still catching his breath. "Had to cut the seatbelt with my pocket knife. Door was jammed." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The woman and her son were loaded into ambulances, both conscious and stable, a miracle by all accounts. The fire department began the process of retrieving the submerged vehicle. News crews arrived, filming the aftermath and interviewing witnesses. Robert found Michael sitting on the tailgate of an ambulance, a blanket around his shoulders despite the warm day. A paramedic was checking his vitals. "How are you doing?" Robert asked, approaching cautiously. Michael looked up, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Officer Hayes, I'm fine. Just standard precautions." Robert nodded, feeling suddenly awkward. "What you did out there, that wasn't standard anything. You saved their lives." "Anyone would have tried," Michael said with a shrug. "Tried, maybe. Succeeded? That's different." Robert paused. "Where did you learn water rescue techniques like that?" "SEAL training, and then some specialized courses after. We did extraction drills in every environment imaginable." A news reporter approached, cameraman in tow. "Mr. Turner, we'd love to get your statement about the rescue." Michael looked uncomfortable. "I'd rather not." "This man is a hero," Robert interrupted, surprising himself. "Former Navy SEAL Commander Michael Turner. Just moved to our community last week, and already saving lives." The reporter's eyes lit up. "Commander Turner, our viewers, would love to hear." "Please," Michael said firmly. "I appreciate it, but this isn't about me. The first responders did their job perfectly. I just happened to be here with some equipment. But the story was too good to pass up." By evening, local news was running the headline, "Retired Navy SEAL Hero Rescues Mother and Child from Sinking Vehicle." The coverage included interviews with witnesses, footage of the rescue aftermath, and details about Michael's military background that someone had dug up, including his impressive service record of multiple overseas deployments and several high-profile rescue operations. What the news didn't mention, because no one made the connection, was the incident from days earlier when Officer Robert Hayes had stopped Michael Turner for jogging while black in an affluent neighborhood. But Robert remembered. Sitting in his living room that night watching the news coverage, he felt something uncomfortable twist in his gut. The man he had treated with suspicion and disrespect had, without hesitation, risked his life to save strangers. On screen, the reporter was interviewing the fire chief. Would they have survived without Commander Turner's intervention? The chief shook his head solemnly. Based on how quickly that vehicle sank and where it ended up, I don't believe they would have. His actions were nothing short of heroic. Robert turned off the TV and sat in silence. For the first time in his 12 years as an officer, he found himself facing an uncomfortable truth about his own behavior, and wondering what that said about the man behind the badge. The police station buzzed with activity as Robert pushed through the glass doors, nodding half-heartedly at the receptionist. A week had passed since the lake rescue, but the heroics of Michael Turner still dominated local conversation. The morning briefing had just ended when Captain Wilson called out to him, "Hayes, my office now." Robert's stomach dropped. He'd been expecting this. The whispers around the department had grown louder. Someone had connected the dots between his encounter with Turner and the subsequent rescue. Robert followed the captain into his office, closing the door behind him. "Take a seat," Captain Wilson said, settling into his chair with a sigh. He was an old-school cop with 30 years on the force and a reputation for fairness. "We need to talk about what happened with Commander Turner last week." "Captain, I was just doing my job. There had been reports of—" "Save it, Hayes." The owl. Captain held up his hand. "I've reviewed your body cam footage. There were no reports matching that description. You stopped a man for jogging in his own neighborhood." Robert fell silent, the practiced excuses dying on his lips. "The district attorney called me personally," Wilson continued. "She witnessed part of the encounter. Do you know how lucky you are that Turner declined to file a complaint?" Robert stared at the floor. "Yes, sir. The department is implementing additional bias training for all officers. You're attending the first session, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp." "Sir, I've already completed—" "This isn't a request, Hayes, and there's something else you should know." Wilson slid a paper across the desk. "Commander Turner is one of the instructors." Robert's head snapped up. "What?" "Turns out he's been consulting with departments across the state on community relations. The chief asked him to help with our program after the rescue made the news." Wilson leaned forward. "He doesn't know you'll be there, and I didn't tell him you were the officer who stopped him. That's between you two to sort out." The next morning, Robert arrived at the community center 20 minutes early, his uniform pressed and his mind racing. He'd barely slept rehearsing what he might say if Turner recognized him. When he entered the training room, a few other officers were already seated, coffee cups in hand. At the front, arranging papers on a desk, stood Michael Turner. He looked different in a button-down shirt and slacks, but the military bearing remained unmistakable. When he looked up and saw Robert, a flash of recognition crossed his face, but he gave no other reaction. "Good morning, officers," Michael began once everyone had arrived. "I'm Michael Turner. Some of you might recognize me from the news last week, but before that I spent 20 years in the Navy, including 15 as a SEAL. My last 5 years of service included developing cross-cultural training programs for special operations teams." He paused, his eyes briefly meeting Robert's. "Today isn't about shaming anyone or pointing fingers. It's about understanding how biases affect all of us, how they influence our decisions, sometimes without us even realizing it." For the next hour, Michael led the group through scenarios and discussions. He shared stories from his military experience about mistrust between units, about quick judgments that led to mission failures, and about the painfully learned lessons of building trust across differences. Robert remained silent, feeling increasingly uncomfortable as the session progressed. When they broke into smaller groups, he found himself alone with Michael at a corner table. "Officer Hayes," Michael said quietly. "I wondered if I'd see you here." Robert cleared his throat. "I didn't know you'd be the instructor." "Would you have? Come if you knew." "Honestly? Probably not." Michael nodded, seeming to appreciate the candor. "Why did you stop me that day?" The directness of the question caught Robert off guard. He'd expected anger, accusations, or smug satisfaction. Not this calm inquiry. Robert began, then stopped. The easy excuses wouldn't come. "I saw someone I didn't recognize in a neighborhood I patrol, someone who didn't fit the profile of the residents." "And what profile is that, exactly?" Robert felt heat rise to his face. "I've been an officer for 12 years. I trust my instincts." "Instincts can be valuable," Michael agreed, "but they can also be wrong. When I was leading teams overseas, I had to constantly check whether my instincts were based on good information or just assumptions." He leaned forward slightly. Do you know what I felt when you stopped me? Not anger, not even surprise, just tiredness. Because it wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last. Robert shifted uncomfortably. Look, I'm not I'm not here to label you, Michael interrupted. I'm just asking you to consider something. What if your instincts about me were shaped by things that had nothing to do with actual threat assessment? What if they were just habits of thinking? Before Robert could respond, Michael continued, I run a veteran support group on Thursday nights at the community center. Several officers from other districts attend. You're welcome to join us. Why would you invite me after what happened? Michael stood as the other groups began to reassemble. Because change doesn't happen through shame or punishment. It happens through connection. He paused. Besides, I saw how you handled yourself at the lake. You're good at your job when you're focused on the right things. That evening, Robert sat in his car outside the community center for nearly 20 minutes, debating whether to go inside. The veterans group would be starting soon. His finger hovered over the ignition several times, but something kept him from leaving. Finally, with a deep breath, he stepped out of his car and walked toward the building. Through the window, he could see about 15 people arranging chairs in a circle. Michael was there, setting up a coffee station. Robert hesitated at the door, his hand on the handle. This wasn't court-mandated. It wasn't part of his official training. He could walk away and no one would know. As if sensing his presence, Michael looked up. Their eyes met through the glass, and Michael gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Not pressuring, just acknowledging his presence. Robert pulled the door open and stepped inside. The conversation dimmed momentarily as several people looked his way. He recognized a few faces, a firefighter, a paramedic who sometimes worked with his department. Glad you could make it, Michael said simply, gesturing to an empty chair in the circle. We're just getting started. As Robert took his seat, he noticed that no one was in uniform. Here, they were just people, not defined by their jobs or ranks. For those who don't know, Michael addressed the group. This is Officer Robert Hayes. He helped coordinate the rescue at Lakeside Park last week. There were nods of acknowledgement, but no special treatment, just acceptance. Tonight, Michael continued, we're talking about transitions. The challenges of bringing our training into civilian spaces where the rules are different. As the discussion began, Robert found himself listening more intently than he had in years. Stories flowed around the circle, stories of misunderstandings, of habits that didn't translate well to civilian life, of having to relearn how to exist in spaces where not everything was a potential threat. Halfway through the session, Robert realized something. He wasn't an outsider here. The experiences being shared, the hypervigilance, the instinctive categorization of people as threats or non-threats, the struggle to turn off the professional mindset, these were familiar to him too. When Michael finally looked at him and asked, "Would you like to share anything, Officer Hayes?" Robert surprised himself by nodding. "I'm learning," he said simply, "that sometimes what I think are instincts might be something else entirely." He paused, looking around the circle. "And I'm wondering how to tell the difference." The group nodded, not with judgment but with recognition. This was a question they all understood. As the session ended and people began to disperse, Michael approached Robert. "Thanks for coming." Robert nodded. "Thanks for the invitation." It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't even friendship. But as Robert drove home that night, he realized it was something he'd experienced too rarely in his 12 years on the force. It was the beginning of understanding. 2 weeks into the training program, Robert found himself actually looking forward to the sessions. The initial discomfort had faded, replaced by something he hadn't expected: curiosity. Today's session was focused on perspective taking, and Michael had prepared what he called a practical exercise. "Today will be different," Michael announced to the group of 12 officers. "We're going outside our comfort zones." Robert exchanged glances with Officer Chen, who had become something of an ally in these sessions. They both recognized the gleam in Michael's eye. the one that usually preceded his most challenging exercises. "You'll be paired up," Michael continued. "One person will wear these." He held up what looked like sunglasses with strange lenses. "They distort your vision, making simple tasks difficult. Your partner will guide you through a series of everyday activities around town." The room filled with groans and nervous laughter. "The point isn't to stumble around helplessly," Michael explained. "It's to experience what it feels like to be instantly disadvantaged in a space that's designed for everyone else. To depend on someone else's guidance in situations you'd normally handle easily." Robert found himself paired with Lieutenant Garcia, a 20-year veteran who made no secret of his skepticism about the whole program. "This is a waste of time," Garcia muttered as they were handed their assignment. "Navigate to the coffee shop, 2 blocks away, order and pay for coffee, and return to the community center." "I'll wear the glasses first," Robert offered, surprising himself. Normally, he'd have shared Garcia's reluctance. The moment Robert put on the glasses, the world transformed. Everything blurred and shifted, colors bleeding into one another, distances impossible to judge. He felt instantly vulnerable. "Ready?" Garcia asked, his voice betraying his impatience. Robert nodded, reaching instinctively for something to hold on to. Garcia awkwardly offered his elbow, and they set off. The 2 blocks to the coffee shop became a gauntlet of challenges. Curbs appeared suddenly. People emerged from nowhere, nearly colliding with him. Cars seemed to materialize at crosswalks. Robert, usually confident to the point of arrogance on patrol, found himself hesitant and anxious. Steps coming up. Garcia warned, but not quite in time. Robert stumbled, grabbing Garcia's arm tighter. "Sorry," Garcia said, sounding genuinely apologetic. 3 steps. I should have warned you sooner." Inside the coffee shop, the cacophony of sounds disoriented Robert. Further, without his vision to anchor him, every conversation, every coffee grinder, every clinking cup assaulted his senses. "What can I get you?" the barista asked, her voice coming from a direction Robert couldn't quite pinpoint. "Medium black coffee," he managed, fumbling for his wallet. "I've got it," Garcia said, stepping in to help with the payment when Robert struggled to identify the bills in his wallet. As they made their way back, Robert's relief at completing the task was tempered by a new awareness of how quickly his confidence had evaporated when the rules of engagement changed. Back at the community center, the pairs debriefed their experiences. Officer Chen described the anxiety of not being able to assess threats properly. Another officer mentioned feeling judged by onlookers. Garcia admitted he hadn't realized how many obstacles existed on a simple 2-block stretch. "The reason for today's exercise," Michael explained as they concluded, "is to experience what it feels like when the world isn't designed with you in mind, when you're constantly at a disadvantage and have to rely on others' goodwill to navigate everyday situations." He looked around the room, his gaze resting briefly on Robert. "Many people in our communities experience versions of this every day, not because they're wearing special glasses, but because systems, assumptions, and yes, sometimes the actions of authority figures like us create obstacles for them." The words hit Robert with unexpected force. He thought about Michael jogging through a neighborhood where he legally lived, being stopped and questioned simply because he didn't fit Robert's mental image of who belonged there. After the session, Robert lingered, helping stack chairs while the others filed out. "What did you think of today's exercise?" Michael asked, gathering his materials. Robert considered the question. It was eye-opening. Literally. He attempted a small joke. Michael smiled. "That's the goal." "Can I ask you something?" Robert said suddenly. "Why are you doing this? Working with the department, with me? After what happened, you'd have every right to file a complaint, make a public statement. Instead, you're here, helping us." Michael set down his papers. "2 reasons. First, change happens through engagement, not alienation. Filing complaints might feel satisfying, but it rarely changes hearts and minds. And the second reason? Because I've been on both sides," Michael said. "In the military, I had to make split-second assessments about who was a threat and who wasn't. Sometimes I got it wrong. The difference was, I had people around me who helped me see those mistakes and learn from them." He paused. "The veterans group meets again tomorrow night. We're discussing transition challenges. You should come back." Robert hesitated. He'd attended once but had missed the following week, feeling like an intruder in a space not meant for him. "I'm not a veteran," he said. "No, but you might have more in common with us than you think," Michael replied. "Police work and military service share some challenges. The hypervigilance, the U.S. versus them thinking, that can be hard to shake off." The next evening, Robert found himself once again sitting in his car outside the community center. This time, he didn't wait as long before going inside. The group had grown since his last visit. There were about 20 people now, including 2 female veterans he hadn't met before. When he entered, a few people nodded in recognition, and Michael gestured to an empty chair. As the session began, Robert found himself drawn into the discussion about civilian transitions, the challenges of adapting to environments where not everyone followed the same protocols, where threat assessment wasn't the primary focus. "In the field, hypervigilance keeps you alive," a former Army Ranger named David explained. "Back home, it isolates you. You're constantly on edge in situations where everyone else is relaxed." Heads nodded around the circle. Robert found himself nodding too. "On patrol, I categorize everyone automatically," he heard himself saying. "Potential threat, probable bystander, known entity. It's second nature after 12 years. "And off-duty?" Michael asked. Robert paused, realizing something he'd never articulated before. "It doesn't turn off. I'm always scanning, always assessing. My wife says I can't even go to the movies without checking all the exits and watching the crowd instead of the screen." The knowing looks around the circle gave him the confidence to continue. "The training we've been doing, it's making me realize how those habits might be affecting my judgment. How I might be seeing threats that aren't there based on patterns I've created in my mind." A heavy silence followed his words. "Recognition is the first step," Michael said finally. "Most people never get that far." After the session, several veterans approached Robert, sharing their own stories of readjustment. For the first time, he felt not like an outsider or an authority figure, but simply as someone struggling with similar challenges. As he was leaving, Michael walked him to the door. "You know, there's no quick fix for this," he said. "Unlearning patterns takes time." "I'm starting to realize that," Robert replied. "But I'm also starting to think it might be worth the effort." Michael nodded. "Same time next week, then? I'll be here," Robert said, and was surprised to find he meant it. Driving home, he found himself noticing things differently. The teenager in a hoodie at the bus stop wasn't automatically suspicious. The group of young men laughing loudly outside. The convenience store weren't necessarily trouble. They were just people, going about their lives in a community that belonged to all of them. It wasn't a transformation. It was barely even a beginning. But as Robert pulled into his driveway, he realized something had shifted in how he saw the world, and more importantly, in how he saw himself within it. 6 months had passed since Robert first attended the bias training sessions. Autumn had given way to winter and then to spring, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed fitting. Robert pulled his patrol car alongside Riverfront Park, where families were enjoying the warm Saturday afternoon. Children played on swings while parents chatted on nearby benches. Teenagers tossed frisbees on the open grass. Robert watched the scene with different eyes than he would have half a year ago. The group of teenage boys playing basketball weren't suspicious youths in his mind. They were just kids enjoying the weekend. The man reading alone under a tree wasn't someone to keep an eye on. He was simply a neighbor seeking some quiet time outdoors. The radio crackled to life. "Unit 17, we've got a call about a suspicious person on Willow Street. Caller reports an unknown male looking into car windows." "Copy that." Unit 17 responding, Robert replied, putting the car in drive. As he pulled onto Willow Street, he spotted a young black man walking slowly along the sidewalk. The man wore jeans and a plain white t-shirt, nothing remarkable about his appearance. He wasn't looking into cars, he was simply walking, occasionally checking his phone. Robert parked his patrol car and got out, approaching with a neutral expression. "Afternoon, sir." The young man looked up, immediate wariness crossing his face. "Afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" "Just checking in. We received a call about someone in the area." Robert kept his tone conversational. "Do you live nearby?" "No, sir. I'm meeting my girlfriend at the cafe down the street. She works there." The young man's posture remained tense, his responses clipped. Before Robert could continue, another patrol car pulled up. Officer Wade, a recent transfer from another district, stepped out and immediately adopted an aggressive stance, one hand near his weapon. "Everything okay here, Hayes?" Wade called out, his eyes fixed suspiciously on the young man. "Fine, Officer Wade," Robert replied calmly. "Just having a conversation." Wade approached anyway, his body language confrontational. "Got some ID on you?" he demanded of the young man. "Officer Wade," Robert interjected, "I've got this situation under control. There's no need." "Better to check him out," Wade insisted. The call mentioned car break-ins. Robert saw the young man's face harden, saw the familiar look of someone being judged unfairly. 6 months ago, Robert might have backed his fellow officer without question. Today, he made a different choice. "Officer Wade, a word, please." Robert guided Wade a few steps away. In a low voice, he said, "There's no probable cause here. He's just walking down a public street. The caller didn't provide any description matching him. Come on, Hayes. You know how these things go. Better safe than sorry." "Actually, I know exactly how these things go," Robert replied firmly, "and that's why we're going to handle this properly." He turned back to the young man. "Sir, you're free to go. Sorry for the interruption, and I hope you enjoy your date." Relief and surprise flashed across the young man's face. "Thank you, officer," he said, before continuing down the sidewalk. Wade stared at Robert in disbelief. "Seriously? You're just letting him walk?" "There was nothing to hold him for," Robert said simply. "And I'd suggest you attend the community relations training that's starting next month. It's been enlightening." As Wade drove away, clearly disgruntled, Robert spotted a familiar figure jogging across the park. Michael Turner, in running shorts and a faded navy t-shirt, had apparently witnessed the entire exchange. He altered his course, jogging over to where Robert stood beside his patrol car. "Officer Hayes," Michael said, slightly out of breath from his run. "Commander Turner." Robert nodded. They had developed a cautious respect over the months. Not quite friendship, but something more than the professional relationship they'd started. "I saw that," Michael said, nodding toward where Wade's patrol car was disappearing around a corner. "That couldn't have been easy." Robert shrugged. "Easier than it would have been 6 months ago." Michael smiled slightly. "Progress." "Small steps," Robert agreed. He hesitated, then added, "There's a community oversight meeting at the station next week. The chief is discussing changes to our engagement protocols. I'm speaking about my experiences with the training program." "I heard about that. Will you be mentioning our first encounter?" Michael asked, his expression unreadable. Robert met his gaze. "Yes, I think it's important. If you'd rather I didn't—" "No," Michael interrupted. "It's a good idea, just wasn't sure you'd be willing to put yourself out there like that." 6 months ago I wouldn't have been, Robert admitted. "But I've had a good teacher." Michael nodded, a mutual understanding passing between them. "I should finish my run. Take care." "Officer Hayes, you too, Commander." As Michael jogged away, Robert's radio came to life again, a minor fender bender at a nearby intersection. He got back into his patrol car, but before driving off, he watched Michael's retreating figure for a moment, thinking about how differently their story could have played out. The following Thursday evening, Robert stood at the podium in the community center's main hall. The room was packed. Police officers, community members, local officials, and press. The quarterly community oversight meeting had drawn more interest than usual, partly because of the changes being proposed to police engagement protocols. Chief Thomas had just finished outlining the department's new approach to community policing, and now it was Robert's turn to speak. He saw Michael sitting near the back next to several members of the veterans group, that Robert still attended regularly. "Good evening," Robert began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I'm Officer Robert Hayes. I've been with the department for 12 years, and for most of that time I believed I was doing my job exactly as I should be." He paused, looking out at the diverse faces in the audience. 6 months ago, I stopped a man who was jogging in an affluent neighborhood. I had no valid reason for that stop, no specific report, no matching description of a suspect. I stopped him because he didn't fit my mental image of who belonged in that neighborhood. A hush fell over the room. From the corner of his eye, Robert could see some of his fellow officers shifting uncomfortably. That man was Commander Michael Turner, a decorated Navy SEAL with 20 years of service to our country, a homeowner in that very neighborhood, a man who just days later would risk his life to save a mother and child from drowning. Robert took a deep breath. I could stand here and make excuses. I could talk about instincts or experience or statistics. But the truth is simpler and harder to admit. I made a judgment based on appearance, not behavior. He looked directly at the community members in the audience. The training program we've implemented isn't about political correctness. It's about effectiveness, about seeing clearly, about making decisions based on actual threats, not perceived ones. Robert spoke for another 10 minutes, describing the exercises, the discussions, the gradual shift in perspective. He talked about the veterans group and the parallels between military and police mindsets. He didn't sugarcoat the challenges or claim some miraculous transformation. "This is ongoing work," he concluded. "I still catch myself making snap judgments. The difference is, now I question those judgments. I ask myself what evidence I actually have, not what patterns I think I see." As the meeting ended and people began to mingle, Robert found himself approached by various community members, some sharing their own experiences with police, others expressing appreciation for his honesty. It wasn't all positive. A few people challenged him on specific department policies, and one elderly woman told him frankly that words are cheap without action. She was right, of course. As the crowd thinned, Robert noticed Michael talking with Chief Thomas near the refreshment table. When they finished their conversation, Michael made his way over. "That couldn't have been easy," Michael said, echoing his words from their encounter on Willow Street. "Putting yourself out there like that." "It wasn't," Robert admitted, "but it was necessary." They stood in silence for a moment, neither quite sure what to say next. They weren't friends exactly. Their relationship had been forged in uncomfortable truths and difficult conversations. "I'm being transferred to the Community Engagement Division," Robert said finally. "Starting next month. The chief thinks my perspective might be valuable there." "Congratulations," Michael said. "That's good news." "I'll still be attending the veterans group," Robert added, "if that's okay." "More than okay," Michael assured him. "You've become part of the community there." As they walked toward the exit, Michael asked, "Do you think anything's really changing? In the department, I mean." Robert considered the question carefully. "Some things are, some people are. It's slow and it's not enough, but it's a start." Outside, the spring evening was mild, the street lamps just beginning to glow as dusk settled over the town. They paused at the bottom of the steps about to head in opposite directions. "See you around, Officer Hayes," Michael said, extending his hand. "See you around, Commander Turner," Robert replied, shaking it firmly. It wasn't a perfect ending. There was no magical transformation, no complete resolution. But as Robert walked to his car, he realized that maybe that was the point. Real change didn't happen in dramatic moments of revelation. It happened in small decisions day after day, in choosing to see people as they were, not as he feared they might be.